Meteorologists are able to drill down into the ice caps in Greenland and Antarctica and pull out long cylinders of ice that are said to show hundreds of thousands of years worth of layering. How can that be if the Earth is only 6,000 to 8,000 years old, according to the Bible? The answer is that ice core dating, as with any dating technique that's used to prove an old Earth, is based on the uniformitarian assumption, the belief that processes and rates that are observed today have carried on in the same way throughout the past with little change. If one layer of ice is deposited each year today, it's assumed that one layer of ice must have been deposited every year since the polar ice caps began growing. But if more than one layer can be laid down each year, it would destroy the belief that ice cores prove the Earth to be hundreds of thousands of years old, and that evidence exists. Individual storms or cyclical weather patterns can cause ice layers that resemble annual layers. The biblical flood model argues that a great ice age was caused by the flood for a few hundred years, with turbulent weather causing as many as 1,000 annual cycles of ice in a single year. Modern estimates for how fast ice accumulates in Greenland are less than 1 foot per year, but has that estimate held throughout time? No, we know it hasn't, because even today, in modern times, we have examples of ice being deposited much more rapidly than 1 foot per year. For example, in 1988, GPR, ground-penetrating radar, was used to discover the location of an abandoned P-38 Lightning fighter World War II plane from 1942 in Greenland. Surprisingly, the planes had been buried under more than 260 feet of ice and snow. Okay, do the math. That's over 5 feet of ice forming every year for 46 years, not less than 1 foot per year. Another P-38 Lightning fighter was found in 2018, this one buried under more than 300 feet of ice. And so even in modern times, uniformitarian estimates for ice accumulation don't coincide with the actual observable evidence. Ice cores don't prove that the Earth is hundreds of thousands of years old. What about tree rings? Do they prove an old Earth? It's argued by some that there are bristlecone pine trees that are alive today that are as much as 6,800 years old, and even a Norway spruce tree, Old Chico, that's said to be about 9,500 years old. If so, these trees would have had to survive the biblical flood and possibly even precede the creation week. They wouldn't prove a millions or billions of years old Earth, but they would present a problem for the biblical timeline if that's true. Old Chico was dated using carbon dating, which is now considered to be a very imprecise and distrusted technique if you're dating something thought to be older than about 3,500 years old or so. Archaeologist Brian Fagan of UC Santa Barbara said C14 dating is not infallible. In general, single dates should not be trusted, he said. You can't trust carbon dating claims about the age of Old Chico, which explains why most people don't include Old Chico in their lists of the oldest living trees. The bristlecone pines, however, were not dated using carbon dating, but dendrochronology. Dendrochronology is the study of tree rings, which can help us know not just how old a tree is, but what the climate was like in the past. Tree rings can tell us when there were droughts in the past, for example. The dark ring that we typically think of as the tree ring is called late wood, and it forms during the summer and autumn seasons. The lighter part forms during the winter and spring seasons. So one ring of late wood forms each year. Now, while some, like Bill Nye, have claimed that some bristlecone pine trees are 6,800 years old, in actuality, the oldest living bristlecone pine tree was discovered in 2012 and is now 5,070 years old, not 6,800 years old. And it received its date using tree ring counting coupled with what's called cross dating. A tree over 5,000 years old, like the presumed age of the oldest bristlecone, pushes its birth back to over 3,000 BC. If the flood happened around 2300 BC, based on history coupled with the genealogies of Genesis 10 and 11, that would mean the oldest bristlecone pine tree would have had to have survived the flood. How would a creationist respond to that? Well, first, the genealogies of Genesis 10 and 11 are worded in such a way that it's possible the flood happened a few hundred years further back in history, somewhere between 3000 and 3500 BC. If so, the bristlecone pine ages, even if they're accurate, wouldn't be a problem for the biblical model. They simply started growing immediately following the flood. But consider also that, once again, uniformity is assumed in tree ring dating. It assumes one ring forms every year, but we know today that rings don't always correlate with single years. Sometimes rings can form sub-annually, with more than one ring appearing in a single year. When unusual, time-staggered, repeated weather disturbances happen in a single year, that can severely affect tree ring patterns. When the unusual weather that accompanied the post-flood ice age is taken into account, the circumstances would have been perfect for the creation of multiple annual tree rings in a single year. So it's very possible that the bristlecone pines are several years younger than they appear, if more than one ring formed per year during the ice age and at other times. But what about cross-dating, where dendrochronologists will overlap tree ring patterns from living, dead, even petrified trees to try to get a tree ring history that extends back, some say, thousands of years further? When we look into the nuts and bolts of cross-dating, we find that it can be a very imprecise and often even opinion-based practice. The tree ring patterns of living trees today, trees found in the same forest even, they don't always match because a ring pattern is affected by how far that particular tree is from its water source, the direction that the sunlight hits that tree, the soil nutrients where the tree is found in the forest, the effects of storm patterns and how they affect that particular tree. So cross-dating can't be said to prove trees have existed thousands of years prior to the bristlecones. But even if the bristlecone pines could be proven to be 6,000 to 8,000 years old and had to survive the flood even, it's still not necessarily a problem for the biblical account. The Bible doesn't say all of the plants of the earth were killed in the flood. Instead, it says all flesh died that moved on the earth, Genesis 7:21, not plants. Some areas of the planet may have had less turbulence, allowing some trees to survive. Keep in mind also that the pre-flood environment was much different. Humans could live longer, animals grew larger, life seems to have been healthier and more robust. Some trees, therefore, could have been stronger, allowing them to survive the flood more easily. Bert Craig of the Department of Horticulture and Forestry at Michigan State highlighted that many tree species can survive months underwater in flooding conditions. Horticulturalists Whitlow and Harris produced a monumental work on the effect of flooding on trees and documented dozens of distinct species that are able to survive deep flooding for one growing season and even for more than a year in some cases. So if trees survive the flood, either because they survived being underwater or because they were brought on the ark with Noah, then trees that are thought to be 6,000 to 8,000 years old wouldn't be a problem for the biblical flood account. Now that said, even if cross-dating could really take us back thousands of years beyond the flood and even beyond possible dates for creation, we have to keep in mind another important condition that is part of the biblical model. God would have created the earth mature, which would have given it an appearance of age. Adam and Eve weren't zygotes in the womb, but could talk, work, procreate as God commanded them to do in Genesis 1 and 2. Trees would have been created fully mature and bearing fruit from the day that they were created. Why? So that Adam and Eve could eat from those trees. If the trees of the earth were already fully mature, then we would expect them to have tree rings, since each tree ring adds strength to a tree as it grows. In other words, the purpose of tree rings really isn't to tell us the age of the tree, it's to provide support for trees as they grow. In the same way that Adam and Eve looked old on the first day of their lives, the trees of the earth would have looked old on the first day of their lives as well. Bottom line, tree ages don't prove an old earth and don't disprove the Bible. For more information, be sure to check out our website at apologeticspress.org.